Our topic of debate tonight, corruption, grand or petty. How effective is the anti-corruption war? Before we continue with tonight's debate, I'd like to bring you some news that made the highlights this week. A councillor with the Nairobi City Council arrested over corruption allegations, as well as some police officers manning a roadblock. Let's have a look at that news.
It was a deal gone wrong, at least for Councillor John Jenga of Nairobi's Kitusuru ward, who was to allegedly receive money to help with the renewal of a land lease at City Hall. But instead of a deal, he got a pair of handcuffs on his wrists and a free ride in a Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission vehicle. The councillor's journey to Integrity House was illuminating. He looked a bit flustered, but retained enough confidence to engage in small talk that was not so small. His remarks, breathing life into fears held by many Kenyans about a City Hall immersed deep in graft.
Yeah, of course. Kazi yetu unajua ni rahisi sana. Unaona kama huyu, amenisikiza. Pata kuja wengine wengi. Na ndio nasema nyinyi mnajaribu. Wewe umekula mingi. Mwezi fika pale mwezi maliza unajua. Ni kujaribu tu mnajaribu.
Indeed, City Hall has over time earned notoriety for graft, featuring year in, year out on the list of corrupt bodies in Kenya. The councillor's assertion that implied corruption was too entrenched at City Hall to be rooted out is perhaps a pointer to how normal the vice has become at City Hall. And it comes shortly after the cemetery land scandal that had about 173 million shillings disappearing. The councillor had allegedly asked for 2 million, then bargained downwards to 600,000. At the time of his arrest, he had allegedly only been given 150,000 shillings of it. Loot, he says, was to be shared.
Kwa mama alikuwa anasema hata wale wengine.
Wewe uko peke yako?
Tuko wengi.
Kama nani? Wewe ni mwingine.
Lakini mnajaribu. Mnajaribu.
Well, that was what was in the news headlines this week. Petty and grand corruption, our topic of discussions tonight. May I now introduce my guests for this evening. Dr. Abogast Akidiva, an Assistant Director at the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission.
No, I have to make a correction. I am not the Assistant Director at the Commission. I'm a Principal Officer Education. We have recently got substantive office holders. That is Professor Lumumba as Director, Professor Jane Onsongo as an Assistant Director in Preventive Services, and Mr. Pravin Bowry, who is the new Assistant Director in Legal Services. Perhaps what you're referring to was when I was in an acting capacity, but my substantive position at the Commission is Principal Officer Education.
All right, Dr. Akidiva, welcome to Newsnight tonight. May
Thank
I
you.
also introduce Mwalimu Mati, the CEO of Mars Group. Welcome to Newsnight tonight.
Thank you, Beatrice.
I'm going to start with you, Mwalimu. On the news you have just seen there for tonight, the City Council councillor actually arrested, but making some comments about how tough the war against corruption is. What is your view?
In fact, he was so brazen as to say, tuko wengi, we are very many. He's basically probably telling the truth. The truth is that our governance systems, whether at the national level, whether it's ministers or our local authorities, are actually infected with the virus of corruption. I don't call it a cancer, I call it a virus, because can you imagine something that actually infects the brain? What a sick brain would do is shut down your limbs, it will immobilize your motion, it will confuse your thought, but ultimately it will stop your heart, it will kill this country. So I think what he is saying in a very ironic way is that Kenyans beware, you're being ruled by a very corrupt lot.
Dr. Akidiva.
It is indeed a very sad state of affairs. Aristotle said that we are the product of our practices. This, to me, is proof enough that corruption has become so endemic that we have inverted values, and therefore it does not really matter whether it's a leader or the man in the street. It's so widespread, and it's because our value system is wrong. And therefore it is important that once we begin to clean up the value system, then people will have the fortitude to resist corruption.
In a situation, though, like the one with the city councillor, where he has brazenly, as Mwalimu put it, said, we are many, what would be the course of action to take? What would be the route to take to ensure that the absolute cause of it or the root of it is found? Because if he's not alone and he's with others, what happens next?
The very first thing that many people would expect would be for the law enforcement element to come in and therefore follow through with the rule of law. But I think it's not a question of just arresting people and shutting them away. It's a question of getting to the person, to the value system, and getting a transformation in terms of the thinking patterns. We would be looking for some kind of cultural reengineering, and that can only be through education. Now, that's a good perhaps moment for me to talk about the three-pronged mandate of the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission. We do have law enforcement consisting of investigations and things to do with the legal system. Then we have the preventive mandate. And under the preventive mandate, we do systems reviews. We look at the regulations of work, the policies, and coming up with codes of conduct and ethics. In that mandate, we are working very closely with the professionals and other institutions. And then the third mandate that oftentimes is ignored is the public education mandate. And under that mandate is where we then focus on how do we enlist people's support in fighting against corruption. How do we get them to get a positive disposition and work towards having a positive national ethos?
Well, Mwalimu, Dr. Akidiva is talking about the three mandates of the KACC. When we look at the effectiveness of KACC, talking about the preventive and the public education and the law enforcement part, when we look at those, how effective do you believe KACC has been?
Well, obviously, they can't have been effective if after various inquiries into the City Council, including the investigation of the cemetery robbery, which was what really was a grave robbery, which you've just alluded to, previous inquiries into corruption at City Hall, including, I remember, in 2003, 2004, where there was a fire that destroyed lots of evidence at City Hall. Clearly, nothing has changed at the Nairobi City Council. I would hazard to say that the situation will be the same around most of our municipal authorities. We have in Parliament former city councillors who, at the time of the election, were actually facing corruption charges which didn't go anywhere. Now, this is not all the Anti-Corruption Commission's fault, because there is a justice chain. They investigate and they prepare files. Our Attorney General and the police are the ones who are supposed to conduct prosecutions. They're not doing that. So returning to your question, preventive services are things that have a long-term sort of horizon for success. So the Commission can't have been expected, I think, in its 6 years of operation to have changed the culture of Kenyans. But clearly they've made no impact on the culture of our rulers, the councillors and MPs and ministers. So perhaps the fifth fourth limb, of anti-corruption is where Kenyans decide that they don't want to be ruled by corrupt people, that they actually decide for themselves that we're going to look for better managers of our public resources and assets, whether it's in the civil service. We're going to look for better, more honest public officers, whether it's policemen or clerks. And in that way, I think they would be doing us a great service if they taught us more about how to identify good people, and certainly if they named and shamed the bad.
In terms of naming and shaming the bad?
I'll have to go back to what he said, that the Commission has had no impact. That's not true. In the sense that we have been working with various institutions in this country. The successes at the KRA is as a result of a very, very close collaboration between the Commission and the Kenya Revenue Authority. The work that is happening at immigration, that is again very close collaboration between the Commission and that department. Just a few days ago, we gave them another report. We've been working with them. We've trained officers in our programs, and these officers then have gone back to the institutions and carried on the reforms that are ongoing. Currently at the Nairobi, City Council of Nairobi, we are working very, very closely with the town clerk, Mr. Philip Kisia, and I'd like to commend him. We have instituted the integrity testing program. If you remember, March of this year, the two principals, the President, His Excellency the President, and the Right Honorable Prime Minister, had a workshop for permanent secretaries, chief executive officers, and people in government at KIA. And at that meeting, the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission was mandated to conduct the ITP across the entire public service. We are also coming up with an integrity and leadership course that will be taken by senior government officers. We've worked very closely with the Minister of Education, the music festival,
When you look though at, in terms of effectiveness, what the public would like to see, and as you pointed out earlier, well, you do not prosecute, but what, in terms of what the public would like to see, how would you rate the issue of effectiveness?
You see, perhaps that has to be understood against a much broader scope of things. For instance, in this country, people say that we have not been working closely, or there is disagreement between the Commission and the Attorney General's office, the Public Law Office. We have concurrence of over 95% of the cases. The only areas perhaps is things like Anglo leasing. So we are effective. It is the measure used in judging the Commission that should take into account the Commission's strategic plan and the things that we've set out to do.